Many times during the Kundalini Awakening process, you will be called into isolation. You will be called into seclusion, and this can either be by force or by choice. Um, at the beginning of my journey, it was almost 3 years that I spent in a state of isolation. My bedroom was my cave, and I would basically be either in my bedroom or I would be in the studio with my teacher. And those were the only two places that I essentially pretty much went for the first 3 years. Um, and the reason for this is because it is in that period of isolation and solitude that you are returning to self, that you are coming into remembrance of who you are at a soul level, at an energetic level. Um, that is when a lot of your clairs, your certain psychic abilities will come online. That is also the time of where the psyche is expanding, and as that expansion is taking place, the darkness is rising, the shadows are rising, all of those unprocessed traumas or memories or lifetimes are coming to the surface, because now they're the filter between the conscious mind, the subconscious mind, and the unconscious mind is essentially very thin. So all of these things are coming to the surface. They're rising up to be brought into your loving awareness, for you to be able to transmute them, to welcome them back, to integrate them back into wholeness. And that is why the isolation is very, very important, because at that point, you're psychically very porous. That's what I found. You are like a psychic sponge. You're almost in a newborn state. So you're very open and receptive to the energies. You are not only moving into energy consciousness, but you are becoming energy aware, you're becoming energy attuned, So at that point, having an environment that is a safe space becomes really, really integral, just a place where you can be safe to be, and give yourself and that process your full presence. Anything else at that point will usually serve to be a distraction. You can also find that you get more triggered during those states when the consciousness is recalibrating. So that's why I found that throughout this journey, throughout this process as it unfolds, there are time and time again, you will be called back into isolation. And maybe some periods, if the activation is bigger, it might be a longer isolation. So that is essentially where you are disconnecting from the collective consciousness, you are disconnecting from the cultural and societal consciousness, and you're disconnecting from perhaps your family consciousness at that time. So there is a lot of disintegration and reintegration happening, and we require that space, we require that isolation to be able to go deeper within ourselves. Everything else at that point, as I said, will serve as a distraction. It will pull your awareness, pull your consciousness outwards, and you will start leaking energy. And you can feel more drained because of that. You can feel more sensitive. You're already going to feel sensitive, but you can feel an increase in sensitivity when you are around other people who do not know internally the process that you are going through, what is unfolding for you. So don't fear the isolation. The isolation is essentially where you die and you're reborn. And that process requires stillness. It requires presence. It requires awareness. So essentially, if we're distracted, if our awareness is being pulled all over the place, or if our awareness is even into other people, if our consciousness is focused on other people, at that time, that is going to be detrimental to our awakening process and to the energy shifting and its recalibration. So we really want to surrender to periods of isolation. And initially, it can feel very jarring and it can be a little scary, especially if we have done a lot in life to avoid ourselves. We all have coping mechanisms. We've all developed these mechanisms, and essentially, these mechanisms are being stripped away. Your ways of coping in the past will no longer work when you are going through the Kundalini awakening and rising process. Those coping mechanisms slowly will get stripped away, because those were either fear-based programs, those were inherited programs, those were programs you carried from past lifetimes. They do not serve the embodiment of your higher self. They do not serve the embodiment of your light and your soul. So all those ways of being and managing that you had relied on once to manage big emotions will no longer work, because you're really being asked to sit and feel, essentially, to feel and to welcome back all of those parts of you that were exiled, that were sent away, that were deemed too big or too dangerous. Um, and through that, connect back with your own intrinsic power and your connection to the divine that you are and the divine that is within you. So please, if you're going through a spontaneous Kundalini awakening, do not fear the isolation. Do not try and run away from that isolation, as tempting as it may be. I tried it on and off, but then I realized that that is not the call of the energy. And the quicker you surrender to the energy and you allow her to do what she knows how to do, the quicker you're going to get out of that cycle and allow that recalibration to take place and allow whatever wants to be birthed through you to come through. What that return to self, you're returning to your true nature in layers and layers. And as every layer gets peeled back, another part of you comes online. Another part of you in your entirety, in your wholeness, in your fullness comes back online. So we don't want to do things that interrupt that process, and the more that we treat isolation and seclusion as sacred, as times of a sacred reset and recalibration, the better it is. A lot of times in modern society, isolation is seen as something very negative. And this is not to say that throughout your journey, you will always be in an isolation. I have not found that to be the case, but definitely there will be periods where you will be required to go into that stillness, into that womb, into that void, and just to be present with yourself and whatever the self is bringing up into the light of your awareness. So don't fight it. And then there will be times where you're more grounded and you're more stabilized in the energy. And then, life will bring people, situation, and experiences to you based on that level of awareness, based on the vibration that you sit in then. And it's going to be a whole different way of you interacting with life, of you experiencing life, of you interacting with people. And you also might find as you go along the journey that you really start to enjoy your own company. You start to enjoy the silence, and you realize that the silence is never really silent. The silence speaks a lot. It has a lot to say. It just needs that loving awareness, that presence, for it to be heard. The whispers in the silence. So you may find that you enjoy the silence, because as the waves of the mind, instead of being choppy, and up and down, as they start being more like a gentle flow, you might kind of enjoy just your own company, your own energy, spending time with yourself, spending time in nature, just being. You won't require as much external stimulation, because you're already feeling full and whole. And if you do have interactions, they will be from a much more grounded, authentic, whole space, rather than from fear or lack or conditioning. So a lot of things change when you surrender to the silence.